I, 32, female, got married to my husband, 33, male, a year ago. We'd been together for 4 years and had been living together for 3 of those years. He introduced me to his family 7 months into our relationship, and I got along well with most of them. I wasn't able to meet his sister, 29, female, until 2 years into the relationship when she finally flew down to visit for the holidays. Now, we'd seen each other before when my husband would sometimes video call her and would even say hi to each other sometimes, so I knew she could recognize me. But the day she came back, she pretended not to know me, and when I did introduce myself, she exclaimed really loudly that she couldn't recognize me because of how different I looked with so much makeup on, and everyone heard that. The funny thing is, I hadn't even used anything other than the lip balm that day, so I don't know what makeup she was talking about. Anyway, that was our first time meeting each other, and as you guys can already tell, it wasn't very pleasant. I still managed to try and be nice to her the next few times that we met, since she'd quit her job and moved back, so we'd be seeing each other every time I visited my husband's house for family events and stuff. But it just never worked out since she was just so mean all the freaking time. It wasn't even like she was outright horrible to me, which might have been easier to stomach, to be honest. But she was really passive aggressive and would constantly make snide remarks about either my hair or my clothes or just something about the way I looked. Eventually, I started dressing up to the nines and had to get a blowout every time I visited my husband's parents so that I wouldn't give my sister-in-law an opportunity to make fun of me. But even that backfired because then she started mocking me for how much effort I would put into my appearance for something as casual as going to someone's house. My husband had picked up on this sudden change in my behavior because he'd noticed how I'd get really stiff and weird around his sister. So one day he sat me down and told me that his sister had just always been a bit of a mean girl ever since high school. He advised me not to take her words to heart because she'd done this to every single member of their family, including his female cousins and some of their aunts. They generally brush it off because they knew what kind of person she was, so it didn't bother them. So now she'd found a new target, namely me, and she was making the most of it by making me feel terrible and insecure. I realized that letting her words get under my skin would just mean that I was letting her win, so after that, I stopped paying any mind to her at all. That was around 6 months ago, and since then, every time I've met her, I've managed to ignore her altogether and pretend that I can't even hear her when she tries to speak to me, and that has considerably improved this little situation that I had. Anyway, we don't speak at all anymore if we can avoid it, and the most we say to each other at parties is hi, since neither of us is interested. So you can imagine my shock when last week she invited me to come along with her on her Bachelorette trip. She got engaged to her boyfriend of 2 years, 3 months ago, and is getting married in 5 weeks. I attended her engagement party with my husband, but she ignored me the entire time. So obviously, I wasn't expecting this and had half a mind to decline the invitation to accompany her on the trip because I was pretty sure it was going to be some cruel prank on me. But then she spoke to me in person and told me that she wanted to make up for the way she'd behaved with me these past couple of years. Self-admittedly, she felt insecure that I was so pretty without even trying and wanted me to feel bad, which is why she started picking on me. She apologized for all of it and told me that she wanted to have a fresh start with me, especially since she was getting married now, and would love to fix our relationship so that we could go out on double dates. After a lot of persuasion, she was finally able to wear me down, and I ended up agreeing to go on a trip with her. Worst decision ever. Now that I look back on it, but whatever. What's done is done now. When I told my husband that I'd agreed to go with her to try and bond, he was pretty thrilled because in spite of her behavior, they were sort of close, so he would have loved for us to get along well. 2 days ago, she picked me up from my house in the morning and we started for the road trip. She also had two of her close friends from high school with her, and they seemed to be less of her friends and more of her cronies, if I'm being honest. As soon as I got into the car, I could feel that something was off. They were more caught up in themselves and didn't try at all to make me feel welcome or included. I hardly talked during the entire 6 hour trip because they didn't make me a part of their conversation at all, and nobody asked me a thing. It felt like they didn't even want to acknowledge my existence. I didn't say anything because I knew that this was my sister-in-law's bachelorette trip, so I didn't want to make a fuss and make the day all about myself instead. So I kept my mouth shut. Then we reached the spa and resort around the evening, but on reaching, I realized that they'd booked just one room for the four of us, and the bed would not have space for more than 3 people. They brought out the drinks and started their own little party in the room, and after a while, they were buzzed while I sat by myself in a corner of the room. I'd asked for the wine to be passed to me, but none of them had bothered to do it, and it felt weird to ask again. So I just didn't say anything and once again sat silently while they had their fun. Around 1:45, I finally worked up the courage to ask them where I'd be sleeping since the bed didn't have much space. By then, they were sloshed and were gossiping about other girls from their high school. So when I interrupted their conversation, my sister-in-law's friends started shooting me the meanest looks they could, but I didn't care. I soon knew that I'd been right about this whole trip being a way to insult me all over again, and my sister-in-law hadn't meant a word of whatever she'd said earlier, so I just wanted to go to sleep and get this whole thing over with. When I asked about where I was supposed to sleep, my sister-in-law got a nasty look on her face, and I instantly knew that this couldn't be good. And then she proceeded to tell me in her most falsely sweet voice that she'd forgotten to book another room and she didn't feel like bothering the staff right now, so I might just have to sleep on the floor. That led to raucous laughter from her and her friends, laughing at their own cruel jokes. I was still delusional enough to believe that she was just kidding and wouldn't expect me to sleep on the floor, so I asked her once again about what I was supposed to do now. And once more, she just told me to lay down on the floor and stop bothering her because she was trying to have a fun time. This time, she wasn't smiling or laughing and wasn't even pretending to joke. She meant what she said, and I was shocked, to say the least, because this was cruel and humiliating on an unimaginable level altogether. I didn't know how to react to this. She went back to gossiping with her friends while I sat there, rooted to my spot because of how angry and insulted I felt by this whole thing. I was so pissed off that I wanted to just slap her, and I'm not even a violent person, but this was the limit, honestly. After 10 minutes of just sitting there, seething, I decided that I'd had enough of this crap and wanted to go home now. So I got up, grabbed the car keys and my stuff, and left without another word. I didn't want to waste my time and energy trying to argue with them, and neither did they care enough to stop me and ask where I was headed either. They didn't even say anything when I took the car keys with me. That's how unaffected they were, but good for me, I guess. So anyway, I packed up and started the drive back home. I hadn't had dinner and neither did I have anything to eat with me, so I was really hungry, but I didn't have any intention of making any stops until I got home. I finished the 6-hour drive all by myself, fueled by nothing but rage, and finally, I reached home in the early hours of the morning. I rang the doorbell exhausted and almost on the verge of collapsing, and luckily, my husband didn't take too long to wake up. He was taken aback to see me back so soon, but he also noticed how worn out I looked, so he saved his questions for later and heated last night's pasta for me as soon as I said that I was starving. After I'd finished one whole bowl and felt better, I took a nap and didn't wake up before 1 in the afternoon. My husband was still waiting for an explanation for all of this, and after I'd finally woken up, I told him everything that had happened. He heard me out silently, and I could tell that he was livid at how his sister had treated me because of his expressions. He was red in the face, and I'd never seen him this pissed off. Within seconds, he was on his phone and had called his sister before I could even say anything. He told her off for what she'd done and called her a spoiled brat with zero human decency, and that he was ashamed to be her brother. I could hear that she was trying to argue back, but couldn't make out what she was saying. It couldn't have been anything good, though, since my husband started looking even angrier. They had a heated argument, and in the end, my husband told her to go to hell and that there was no way he'd be attending her wedding now. Having said that, he hung up. I was happy that he'd finally decided to tell her off because of her behavior, since so far she'd gotten away scot-free, even after being awful to not just me, but any other female member of his family. He told me that he'd never said anything to her because he'd believed that she'd grow out of it. But clearly, even at this age, if she hadn't realized that bringing down other women and humiliating them didn't make her look any better, then she probably wouldn't realize it ever. And this was the last straw for him, like he said to me later. He even apologized for never trying to correct her behavior earlier, and felt that a lot of this could have been avoided had he and his parents just tried to call her out, even once, instead of letting her get away with whatever she said. So yeah, I was happy that he'd had this realization, and that was that. But now his sister and her friends are hounding me with calls and texts, demanding that I convince her brother to take back what he said. They believe that I'm the one who's way too fussy about something petty, and even have the audacity to accuse me of overreacting. They're claiming that obviously they were going to make some arrangement for me to sleep eventually, but I was being too fussy, which is why they got annoyed. I know that's a load of crap, though, and I don't buy a word of it. I've told my sister-in-law that I'm not convincing my husband of anything at all. She did something cruel, and now she's facing the consequences for it. None of that is my fault, and that's when she started crying and sent me multiple voice notes calling me selfish and cruel. AITA for refusing to persuade my husband to attend his sister's wedding after she humiliated me on her Bachelorette trip? Update 1. So today, it's been almost 3 days since I returned from my trip, and for 3 days my sister-in-law has been bombarding me with texts and demanding that I speak to my husband and make him forgive her. The funniest part is that she hasn't even actually bothered to apologize to me yet, and just believes that I'll lie for her and pretend that it's all good between us so that my husband will still attend her wedding. Obviously, I'm not doing that, and have been ignoring all her texts. She's really laying it on thick with the guilt-tripping thing, though, and it's beginning to get under my skin because she's gaslighting me into believing that I was the one who overreacted. Any other sane person in my position would have reacted the same way, so I don't really think what she's saying is right. And as if that's not enough, now my mother-in-law has also joined in on this. I don't have a bad relationship with my mother-in-law, so I'm surprised that she's getting involved in this at all. But then she'll obviously side with her daughter over her daughter-in-law, so I guess it's not too shocking. I'm just upset that she's chosen to believe my sister-in-law's version of things and thinks that I overreacted as well because, like I said earlier, we have a healthy relationship. I haven't told my husband about any of this, but now that it's two of them against me, I guess I'll have to speak up and make him deal with them so they stop bothering me. As much as I hate to say it, his family isn't my problem. I hope he speaks to them or whatever, and they stop texting me. Update 2. I told my husband after dinner about how his mother and sister had been trying to get me to convince him to attend the wedding, and showed him the texts that they'd been sending me. He flared up as soon as he saw those texts because now it wasn't just his sister but also his mother who was going out of their way to disturb my peace, especially when I wasn't even in the wrong there. I thought he'd call them up again, but instead, he decided to speak to his mother in person. He drove to his parents' house at 10 p.m., a few minutes after dinner, and came back home at 11:30. I tried to stop him from going because I knew for a fact that confronting his mother so late at night, while he was in such a foul mood, would inevitably lead to a huge fight and even more problems. But he didn't listen and went anyway. And what I'd thought would happen was exactly what happened. He needed to get into a really bad argument with his mother about whatever had been happening. He was very upset and still fuming when he came back home, and we stayed up way past midnight while he ranted about his family to me. I truly felt bad for him when he told me about the fight, since I knew that he was very attached to his parents and his sister, so going against them must be really hard on him. His mother had gone above and beyond in her attempt to defend her daughter, and in the process had ended up saying a lot of cruel things about me. She'd call me a liar, a drama queen, and worst of all, she'd said that if my husband didn't attend his sister's wedding, then she'd make sure that everyone in the family goes no contact with us for the rest of their lives. My husband has a pretty big family, and he's especially close to his mother's side of the family. His mother is the senior most of all her siblings and cousins, so her word is quite respected, which means that if she says that they need to go no contact with him, his relatives will probably end up doing that. But he said that he's mentally prepared for that to happen, and there's no way in hell that he's attending the wedding because he absolutely needs to stand for what's right. I'm glad that he's so firm on his principles, but I also feel awful that his own mother and sister are putting him through something like this. I also feel guilty and responsible for what's happening. It all just feels like my fault now, and I don't know what to do at this point. Update 3. Hey guys, almost a week has passed since the last update, and my in-laws had almost totally cut us off, or so I thought, until this morning. We'd had no contact with anyone, neither my sister-in-law nor my mother-in-law, after that whole fight, and I was fine with it. My husband, even though he was upset, was trying to accept it and had almost come to terms with it, but then today happened. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed up today demanding to see my husband. Both of us were about to leave for work when they came by, and we only had minutes to spare, so my husband made the mistake of telling them to make it quick. That set his mother off, and she began to rant about how they apparently held no value in his life after his marriage, and how we were showing our true colors now. She accused him of favoring his drama queen wife instead of his own little sister right in front of me, and I was stunned that this woman, who's always been sweet to me, was not suddenly saying all this crap about me. My sister-in-law looked really pleased with the situation, and that irritated me the most. I had had enough of their bullcrap and wasn't just going to sit around and take some more, so before my husband could say anything, I intervened and snapped at them. I gave them a piece of my mind, especially my sister-in-law, telling her that she was nothing but an insecure and ill-mannered little liar, and that she should be ashamed of herself. I let out months and months of pent-up frustration that had been building up, and by the end of it, she was in tears. I called her a manipulative and conniving a-hole who only knew how to put other people down so she could seem like less of a loser, but clearly it wasn't going to work here. It was a pity that she always tried so damn hard to bring me down, because it meant that she looked at me as competition. But I didn't, which just showed how insecure she was as a person. And I might have made some comments about her makeup and forehead as well, which I'm not really proud of, but hey, might as well get it all out in one go. Even my mother-in-law was stunned by my outburst, because I'm usually a really calm and composed person. But I just couldn't take this anymore. After I was done, my mother-in-law still had the audacity to try and tell my husband that our behavior was out of line, so I snapped at her as well. I told them both to get the hell out of our house if they didn't like our behavior, because honestly, we were only treating them the way that they'd been treating us. They'd shown us absolutely zero respect or kindness, and we were just returning the favor. I'm pretty sure that the two of them had thought that we just apologize if they tried to manipulate us and guilt trip us in person, but that really didn't work out for them and backfired in the worst possible way. So they left. sufficiently insulted and humiliated, and my husband and I ended up taking a day off of work anyway because of how intense the morning itself had been. Whatever sadness he still had in his heart seemed to vanish with this one visit because it just proved that his parents would let his sister get away with anything, even if it was fundamentally wrong, and that he was only a good son as long as he supported them in whatever they did without thinking about whether it was right or wrong. He's just done with his family now, probably even more done than I was. Update 4. Been a while since I posted here and updated you guys, so here goes. First off, my sister-in-law got married around 3 days ago, and like we'd said, we didn't attend, and it doesn't seem like she was too affected by this, which is fine. But then she went out of her way to mention me in her wedding speech and narrated what had happened between us, the whole incident at the resort and how I'd decided to be petty and overreacted, which eventually led to a huge fallout between her and her brother. She made it sound like I was the drama queen and passed her own actions off as a huge joke or whatever, basically just blaming me for the whole fiasco and the fight she and her mother had with my husband. This was an obvious attempt by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to show me and my husband as the bad guys so that the rest of the family would turn against us. But then, thankfully, the rest of the family wasn't really as stupid as they thought, and they knew something was fishy about the way that they were making it sound like I was an overly sensitive brat and she was just joking. So some of them texted me asking about what had been said, and I obviously explained the entire story to them. Given my sister-in-law's past behavior, nobody was surprised in the least that she'd pulled something like that, and even had the guts to try and make it look like my fault. So long story short, now they're the ones who have been cut off by the rest of the family, and once again, their own manipulation tactics have backfired on an epic level. This is just karma at its best, and my husband and I couldn't be happier about it. We blocked my sister-in-law way back after the last fight that we'd had, and have been living a drama-free life since then, so going no contact with us isn't the punishment that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law believe it is. In fact, we're much better off without them. We'll continue to live without a trace of drama now that nobody else wants to talk to them either, so we won't have to see them at other family events. Good for us. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.